Today's top picks from Reuters Breaking Views. How do you measure the risk of Eurozone breakup? And Manchester United counts on investors behaving like fans. With me now to discuss these stories is Reuters Breaking Views assistant editor Peter Tal-Larsen. Peter, something that was lost in Draghi's comments, the doing whatever it takes to save the euro. Last week, something he said about convertibility. Analysts aren't agreed on what that means. What's your take on it?
Well, we think what he means is the risk of a country leaving the Eurozone. And the implication was, the way he set it up was that there are three reasons why bonds might trade. One is credit risk, one is liquidity risk, and one might be convertibility risk, which is you think that these bonds are actually going to get redenominated into something other than euros. And his argument essentially is that the ECB has a legitimate reason to do something about convertibility risk because, of course, it is inconceivable that any country should leave the Eurozone. Of course. And so, but it's an interesting kind of approach because you then say, well, okay, what is the convertibility risk implicit in Spanish or Italian bonds? And when you start looking at this, actually, it's very hard to work it out because you don't necessarily know whether the yields on these bonds are elevated because people think they're going to get converted into new pesetas or new lira, or because people think that Spain or Italy might default and remain within the euro, like Greece did, for example. So it's actually quite hard to unpick. And we've had to play around with various ideas about how you might try to measure it, none of which is perfect. Which gets you something in the range of sort of 50 basis points or maybe 70 basis points or maybe a bit more. And
does that vary from country to country?
Yeah, I mean, but what you really end up with is any way you have of trying to measure this is very imprecise. So that then begs the question, well, if Mario Draghi were to say we're going to eliminate the convertibility risk from these bonds, what would that actually involve? Are you targeting a 50 basis point reduction in yields or a 70 basis point or 100 basis points or what? So it's all quite vague, but actually this may not really matter because the real point is that Draghi is essentially creating a framework that gives him cover to intervene and to bring down the yields on some of these bonds.
Wouldn't it be easier for him and for him just to say, okay, we'll put a cap on the yield spread at say 300 basis points or 400 basis points? That would cover those three risks: convertibility, credit, and default risk.
Yes, but you have to remember the framework that the ECB is operating in, and explicitly this prevention it has on financing governments. So, so there's a distinction here between we can't finance governments, but we have to make sure the monetary transmission system is working. And the way to sort of combine those two is to basically say, well, we're going to deal with the risk of convertibility. And if it's actually hard to measure and nobody quite knows what convertibility risk actually is, that actually makes it easier to go in and intervene.
OK, on to Man U. Their plans for an IPO seem to get a universal thumbs down. But you argue that Man U wants investors to behave like fans. I presume you mean blind loyalty, sticking with them through thick and thin, spending money they haven't got?
Exactly. That's exactly what Man United fans do, don't they?
All fans, I think.
Yeah, all fans. You're absolutely right. We've been looking at the prospectus for the IPO. You remember that Man United, they're originally going to list in Singapore. Now they're going to list in New York, well known for its love of soccer. And clearly there are all kinds of problems with this IPO. It's a dual listed share structure. Kind of the Glazer family will control the most of the votes through the B shares. It's registered in the Cayman Islands. It's going to be hard to control the corporate governance. You're probably not going to get a dividend anytime soon. And the proceeds of the IPO are mostly going to paying down debt.
Sounds a good investment.
Yeah, but then when you start looking at the valuations and you say, well, okay, and then you take into account the fact that they've been very successful as a club, Man United, but this year the revenue is going to be down because they didn't make it into the final stage of the Champions League. And of course, they've just been overtaken by their main rivals, Manchester City, who have got deep pockets and an Abu Dhabi sheikh who seems willing to spend whatever he needs to be successful. Take that all into consideration. Then look at the valuation. The top of the range, this company, the equity will be worth $3.3 billion, which is about 3 times what the Glazers paid for it 7 years ago. And then another $500 million of debt, and you end up with a valuation something in the region of 22 times EBITDA, which, and then you look around and say, well, are there other companies that are sort of, similar companies listed on these kind of multiples? And the closest one we could find is MSG, which owns Madison Square Gardens and the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers. They trade on 11 times EBITDA. So, there are a lot of red flags here, essentially. Red flags of the wrong variety. While supporting Manchester United may be sort of a ticket, or has been in the past anyway, ticket for success, I'm not sure buying the shares would be.
Well, we'll find out in due course. Peter, thank you very much. That's all for now. My thanks there to Peter Tal-Larsen. Well, for more agenda-setting financial insight, do watch our US Breaking Views show every day. That's 12:30 Eastern, 17:30 BST. I'm Jamie McGeever. This is Reuters.